views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
Welcome to the transformative show, We Carry the Light, with host Dr. Susan Allison, the show that inspires you to find the light within and shine your light in the world. Who are you right now? And who do you want to be? What is it that makes you happy, helps you feel fulfilled, and living your purpose? Tune in and let Dr. Susan help you discover that you carry the unique light that only you can shine. Now, here is your host, Dr. Susan Allison.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the universe. So welcome to We Carry the Light. And yes, this is Dr. Susan, and I'm so glad you're here, either live or listening to the archive show. So life continues to move fast for me, as I've shared the last few weeks, with my book coming out and radio and TV media tour and book signings coming up. So I've been hitting the ground running, and my guess is that you are equally busy this time of year. For me, sometimes it seems like the pace is continually increasing, and in a way, I'm the only one that can step out of this race and take some breath and slow down. Lately, I find myself getting caught up in this whirl, and it's doing when I'm really not a human doing. I'm a human being. So I have to remind myself that I am needing to be. And how do I do that is the good question of the hour. Well, when I was pregnant with my daughter, and she is almost 40, she's going to be 40 in the spring, March 5th. I began to practice transcendental meditation in order to have as calm a pregnancy as I could, and I wanted to share this peacefulness with my daughter and create a bond with her. So a friend took me to my first TM training, assuring me I would really improve my life through meditation. I remember driving there with him and saying, I really don't have time to meditate, and he laughed and said, if you don't have a few minutes twice a day to meditate, there is seriously something out of balance in your life. You've let your busyness control you. I remember being offended by his comment, thinking, that's not true, and he's judging me. But we were already driving to this first group, and so I went. But almost immediately, I realized that he was right. And meditation has changed my life over the last 40 years. I also remember my children, and they were no more than, let's say, 3 or 5 years old, saying, "Mommy, did you meditate?" And it was because I had rushed into the kitchen. I was slamming cupboards. I was barking orders. I was obviously I had not meditated. And my 3 and 5-year-old knew that. It's funny looking back, but I remember because when I did meditate, they noticed there was a flow in our morning. I spoke more softly. I was really organized and focused, but I was in a much, much more gentle space with everyone. So also, meditation has helped my health, to say the least. In the last 40 years, I've gone to the doctor maybe once a year for an annual checkup, and they often ask if I'm a marathon runner or if I work out daily. And it's because my blood pressure is very low, my pulse is slow, and all my blood tests are perfect. And except this year I needed to take a D3 supplement, which a lot of people do, but that's it. And I am pretty sure, in fact, I know that the research supports it, that meditation is the reason I am so physically healthy and mentally calmer. I still use the same mantra, which is a 2-syllable Sanskrit sound, and silently say the first syllable on my intake of breath, and then as I breathe out, I say the second syllable. And I did go to a workshop a few years ago, was given a new mantra, but I soon returned to my original one, which really works for me. And I find I can meditate anywhere. I can meditate in airports and, when I'm on flights. As soon as the whirring of the engines start on the airplane, I'm already in trance and meditating. I can meditate riding in a car. I can meditate on a park bench. But preferably, I like to sit propped up against pillows in bed and do my meditation and prayer and gratitude before my feet even hit the floor, which I have shared with you before. And by the way, learning to meditate did help me while I was pregnant with my daughter, and I still have an amazing connection with her. My meditation practice obviously has been on my mind this week. I've been kind of thinking back on the history of it since I've been reading Rick Heller's new book, Secular Meditation, 32 Practices for Cultivating Inner Peace, Compassion, and Joy. I like how easy the book is to read. I like the way it's set up. And I especially like the exercises, which you are experiential and you actually are doing the meditation practice. And I like the questions at the end of the chapters very much. So as luck and good planning would have it, Rick Heller is here today as my guest, and he will be sharing more with you about ways to meditate and the benefits of meditation. So it's going to be a great show. Rick Heller is co-founder of the Humanist Mindfulness Group at Harvard Humanist Community, where he leads meditation groups. A freelance journalist, he's written for the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, Buddha Dharma, Free Inquiry, Tikkun, and Wise Brain Bulletin. He lives in Belmont, Massachusetts, and his website is www.rickheller.com, which we will mention throughout the show. So, Rick, welcome to my show.
Good morning.
And so glad you're here.
I'm very happy to be here.
Oh,
I think we'll have an interesting conversation.
I think we will too. And, it's not an accident because I choose my guests carefully and love to have conversations. It's sort of like preaching to the choir when I read your book, but I really loved it very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I love to start, and I do this with every guest, I like to start with the personal. And in chapter 7 of your book, you talk about your own story that led you towards meditation, that led you to write this book. And I'm wondering if you could share it with listeners.
Yeah, so in the 1980s, I had just graduated from Harvard with a master's degree, and I moved out to California to take a job in state government. And I encountered a sort of a different culture out there. Like there were people meditating, and I thought it was really weird, actually. And but I was having problems with my eyes. It was a type of eye strain, and it was quite severe. I'd been having it for several years, and it was actually interfering with my work. And I went to a number of doctors. One eye doctor said it was psychosomatic, but I didn't believe him. Then I went to a doctor at University of California, San Francisco Medical School. He took a look at my eyes. He said that my eyes were healthy, but that he believed that I had become hypersensitive to pain by focusing on it with a great deal of aversion. This is actually a message that I now, he didn't talk in any sort of Buddhist terms, but I now see what he told me as consistent with some sort of Buddhist principles, that the more you bring aversion to something, the more you amplify the suffering. And this is something he, in his own words, told me, and it clicked. And over the next 48 hours, I had this real, it was almost like a miracle. The pain went away, and it became, I was able to function again. It was really wonderful. Wow. And that opened up my mind to things. So then when I used to go to the YWCA in San Francisco to swim, and I saw there was a meditation class. And before I would have turned up my nose at it, but now I decided I'd be a little bit more open-minded, and I thought maybe I do need some stress relief. So I took the class. It was a very secular class. It was taught by a yoga instructor, and she really just taught how to breathe deeply through the diaphragm and just breath meditation. And that's what I did for about 20 years, just that. And then about 10 years ago, I actually learned, I was exposed to a lot of other different practices. And in the last 6 years, I've actually been leading meditations, which now go on weekly in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Wow. and look how far you came from how you felt about it at first and what you're doing now.
That's right.
Well, I honor you for opening. You opened up to it rather than judging it. I think we judge things that we're sort of afraid of too. I'm sure coming from the Boston area and coming to California, especially Northern California here, was quite a change for you.
Yeah, it certainly was in the 1980s. Meditation has now become pretty big in the East Coast as well, and the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts is where John Kabat-Zinn created mindfulness-based stress reduction. So it's become fairly significant on the East Coast as well, but 30 years ago that wasn't the case.
No, it's very, very true. And so I'm glad that all happened. It all happened for a reason. And what did you actually do to get the eye pain to go away? And you said it was like a miracle. But just for listeners, what did you literally specifically do?
Well, there were actually a couple of things. One thing I was having, it seemed like my eyes were my eyes were dry, but I actually started singing anthems, actually, like America the Beautiful and things like that. There's certain anthems which I actually always knew that I might tear up or something like that. So I didn't, sing these way out loud so other people would hear me, but sort of to deal with this one issue, which was dry eyes, I found this way to essentially manipulate myself into a more emotional state, and that really helped actually with this dry eye situation. And the other thing I had was simply the knowledge that the pain was not going to, it did not signify that something was really wrong, that it was a sort of a incorrect signal, and just accept that it was there, and it just faded, actually.
Wow, that's quite a story. I can see why it seemed like a miracle. And you could have been singing out loud in Northern California, and nobody would have thought you were weird. But, because I'm from Santa Cruz, which is like a little Berkeley, and every walk of life here, every different kind of person, such diversity. And I'm just kind of teasing you, but you wouldn't have been out of place if you'd been singing to your eyes out loud. Would have been okay.
Yes.
So I think it's really, really interesting that you got yourself to tear up, and that solved one thing, and then you also opened up yourself emotionally, which was another dividend. So thanks for sharing that. So you mentioned the word secular when you talked about going to the yoga class, that it was a secular class, and your book is called Secular Meditation, and I would like you to explain why you titled it that, what you mean, and why this might appeal to a large number of readers.
Well, secular means not religious, and specifically what we're trying to get at is the main focus is for people who are in fact non-religious, and in fact often people who are alienated from religion. So the place I lead the meditations is called the Humanist Community at Harvard. It's affiliated. It's affiliated with Harvard University. It serves the needs of students at Harvard who are not part of a religious group. Many of the people would identify as atheists or agnostics. Not all. As some might identify as spiritual but not religious. But basically, most of the people are a bit allergic to anything that seems religious. They will actually, it has a negative feel to them. So in order to get them to consider meditation, I make it clear, first of all, we see this as a practice that affects the brain. And as far as we know, there's no research that shows there's any sort of psychic powers that are involved. And so for instance, the practice that I lead off with, which is loving kindness meditation, I indicate that if you practice this will change the way you feel. And then if you are meditating about another person, then the next time you actually see that person, you might be kind to them. But I say that, as far as we're concerned, we don't really think that there's anything metaphysical that transmits during the meditation itself.
That's really clear. So do you find that does anyone end up having a spiritual experience from doing the meditation work?
I haven't had that reported. I try not to be exclusive. We try to be welcoming. So
Yes.
anyone can come, and people do sometimes talk about their own experiences in other communities, and so that sometimes that will come up in conversation. But
Yeah.
in our meditations itself, it's more, I would say, people who are feeling stressed reach a place of calm, or sometimes reach a very positive state.
Yeah. So people are coming because of physical stress, mental stress, and it sounds like it also has a positive effect in terms of their relationships with others.
Yeah. So, well, one of the thing that's perhaps a little bit different from our group compared to others. So the humanist community, humanists tend to be very focused on, let's say, social justice, things that are going on in changing the world. And what we're doing in the meditation group is really changing ourselves and changing our inside. But one of the things I think that's sort of a bridge between the two is practices like the compassion practices, because you can actually change yourself in a way that makes you relate to other people in a better way.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that about your book, that, the loving kindness meditation, you start with yourself, and then it out to other people, and the compassion meditation the same way that you practice self-compassion. So I wanted to start, in fact, and this is for any listener that's not driving, not at work and needing to focus, and they can listen to this later, but I'm wondering if you would say the beautiful, almost like a mantra itself, this beautiful chant. It's on page 15 of your book, but it's the starting with yourself, what it is you say in the loving kindness meditation.
So we would close our eyes, and we would say, "I'd like to be safe. I'd like to be healthy. I'd like to be happy. I'd like to be at ease in the world." And I would tend to repeat that. So if I can do that again.
Please.
I'd like to be safe. I'd like to be healthy. I'd like to be happy. I'd like to be at ease in the world.
And I know you say here to repeat the phrase. Do people just repeat it as much as they want?
Well, normally, when I lead it, I repeat it twice, and then we sort of sit quietly for a minute or so, or 2 minutes, and then go on to the next person. There's, in the loving kindness practice, is a series of persons one thinks about: oneself, one's loved ones, and then what we call a neutral person. I often say the person who served you coffee at Starbucks this morning. Just think about that person. Yeah. And then build to what we call the difficult person, a person who one might have some issues with, perhaps a coworker, and kind of try to build an emotional momentum that that goes from the loved ones to the neutral person and to that difficult person.
I like how you do that. You say, don't start with somebody who's hurt you, and very wise that you start more neutrally and then move towards that person.
I recommend the coworker, because oftentimes coworkers are, they're fine people, but we just don't match up well with them, not good chemistry. We wouldn't choose to be with them except for the fact that we're being paid.
Exactly. So you use the word metta, and this is for listeners, METTA, metta. Now, is that loving kindness? Does it mean the same thing as loving kindness? And is that what you're talking about in that meditation in the first chapter?
Yeah, so the word metta is often translated as loving kindness. One of the things I distinguish between metta, or loving kindness, and compassion is that in the Buddhist terminology, compassion is a feeling of concern for people who are suffering, whereas loving kindness is a feeling of concern and a warm feeling for people who may not be suffering. And so it's actually, I think, the same feeling, but it could be actually to someone who's actually in a good state, and you're feeling warm toward them.
No, I like that. I like how you distinguish between those. And I mean, the whole concept of compassion and self-compassion, why is it important for us to feel compassion? And I especially want you to talk about self-compassion.
Well, one of the things, I try to bring things on a sort of secular basis, but I do think there are certain aspects of Buddhism that can be justified on a secular basis. One is they're called the Brahma Viharas, and they are this idea of compassion, loving kindness, something else called sympathetic joy, where you actually feel joy at the when others are feeling joy, you feel joy too. It's an empathetic joy. Mm-hmm. And also the fourth one is a sense of equanimity, and I think it's a positive equanimity that one goes through in life. And so the one of the things about this idea of sympathetic joy is that when we see that others are happy, sometimes it can bring up envy. Yeah. But if you can actually connect with them empathetically and feel joy for their joy, you're actually feeling joy, and it actually puts you in a better place. So you don't actually profit from the envy. You can actually profit from this feeling of connecting emotionally with other people and feeling joy. So I think this is a way that people can live better.
Mm-hmm. No, I like that a lot. And I've been practicing it for some time, the sympathetic joy. And it just improves your entire mood, your entire day. And you're not in that comparison place or the place that feels less than. You are in an expanded place.
That's right.
So I love that. I wanted this whole concept of self-compassion, why is it so hard? Seems like it's easier for us to feel compassion or feel joy for others and feel empathy than it is to feel those things for ourselves. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's natural to be self-critical, and I took a class, a self-compassion workshop with Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, and one of the things they mention in that if you think about the sort of things you call yourself, you can be very critical, and if you think what would happen if any one of your friends called you that thing? You're a loser, you're terrible, you mess up all the time, and if any one of your friends said those things to you, they might not be your friend anymore, or you wouldn't consider them a friend. So why do you pursue that for yourself? And so there's a idea that sometimes I think a certain amount of negative feedback is useful. If you try to do something and you don't succeed, it is worth considering the reasons why you didn't succeed, but without labeling yourself in this very harsh way. And if it does come up, because it's kind of natural to do that, catch that, be mindful of what happened, and follow that with a self-compassionate thought. So that's actually one of the practices called Tonglen, which is when it's an alternating between being aware of suffering and then feeling compassion for the person who suffers. Often that's actually another person, someone else who is suffering, but it can also be oneself. When one notices oneself is suffering, interrupting that thought and bringing self-compassion to oneself.
No, I love that part of your book because I feel that we are awfully hard on ourselves, Rick. Mm-hmm. And, and I think it's the ego. I mean, I call it the ego. People call it different things. But these voices come in that are very critical or judgmental, and they could even be from someone in childhood. And then I go to the other side of my head and go into my higher self, what I call my higher self. And then I counter that. And my higher self usually says, that's not true. Mm-hmm. It's a very simple phrase, just says that's not true, very gently, and then says what is true. And so I've been working on that and working on it with clients for years, but it's a way to develop self-compassion rather than the beating ourselves up that we often do.
Yeah, and one thing I go into, and this I got from Professor Neff, was that distinguishing self-compassion and self-esteem. Even in self-esteem, there is this self-compassion component where you are feeling warm to yourself, but there's also this evaluation component, and that can be problematic because it sort of says in self-esteem, you have to say that you are successful, everything's great, and it may not actually be true. So perhaps you took a test and you actually did below average, or you flunked it or whatever, and you don't have to didn't be in denial about that. You can say, okay, I didn't do that well, and still you can have compassion for yourself.
Exactly. I love the word assess, and I try to use that to assess rather than judge.
Mm-hmm.
So, to assess what happened is much more neutral. It's almost as if we're stepping back and looking at what happened. Oh, I didn't study very much.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I stayed up too late. Oh,
mm-hmm.
And then put in, assess and then correct
mm-hmm.
is sort of how I have tried to live my life. That
mm-hmm.
rather, because it's too easy to go to that judging place, which does nothing except sort of take us, just start circling the drain.
Yeah, and I think if you have that judging habit, you may actually start to engage in denial to try to prevent yourself from going there, whereas if you can actually, be realistic and still be positive.
Exactly. I love it. When we come back from our break, we're going to talk with Rick Keller about practicing universal love. Is that a bit ambitious, and is it possible? We'll be right back.
Dear God, remove the sadness and pain from my heart. Make me a part of all you are. Dear God, make me a star full of light from above.
The preceding audio was via a Skype call.
Put a little woohoo in your life with Keys. Keys Clear Protein Waters have 22 grams of smile-making, attitude-adjusting protein in every bottle. Did I mention its tongue-tingling taste? Not just another guilty pleasure. With Keys, you'll enjoy every low-sugar sip and freedom from gluten, lactose, and GMOs. Who needs the fountain of youth when you can find Keys on Amazon or at Keys, Kees, please.com. Put a little woohoo in your attitude with Keys Protein Water.
A word of caution: if you prefer the status quo and you are not interested in improving every aspect of your life, this book will trigger the shift out of you. The Truth is Funny, Shift Happens is available now. Author Colette Steffen brings the powerful knowledge and life-changing energy and empowerment from the radio airwaves to the pages of her new book. To get your copy in paperback or ebook, visit thetruthisfunny.com today.
Shine On Radio. Find Your Shine with Kelly is the show that celebrates what makes you, you. Join co-hosts Kelly Wadler and Dr. Pat Basili as they break down how to brilliantly fuel and move your body and love what makes you shine. Kelly is a professional arts and wellness coach dedicated to helping brilliant women find their confidence, energy, self-love, and shine. Tune in to Shine On Radio with Kelly and find your shine on TransformationTalkRadio.com.
Hi, I'm Leslie Fontaine with Sheer Alchemy on Transformation Talk Radio, and here's your tip of the week. When we own our own responsibility, we're choosing to own our choices, our energy, our day, our jobs, our relationships. It's a tall order. And what difference does that make? Well, plenty. We're choosing to look within, to change agreements within ourselves, to keep our energy field clean, and to upgrade as needed to make choices that are authentic to us. This shifts our language. We no longer blame others. We're no longer victims of our circumstances. So if we don't get paid abundantly or loved abundantly, let's look within and ask, where am I not honoring myself? Where am I not loving myself? Let's change the agreement. Let's get real with what's in place, forgive ourselves and others, and shift into our new life. Visit me at lesliefontaine.com or call me at 678-665-3366. Let this be the last day that you choose to look outwardly and look within.
Are you ever consumed with the idea that something needs to change? You hear Oprah and other inspiring people talk about living your authentic life, and yet it's much easier said than done. Duda, the kick-ass muse, has crafted a world-renowned coaching platform that will help you get clarity on the issues you face, take bold risks, get back your confidence, and brave your fears. To learn more and work with Duda today, visit kickassmuse.com.
Dear God, remove the fear and doubt from my mind. Let me be kind, just like you.
Welcome back, everyone, to We Carry the Light. This is Dr. Susan, and I'm here with Rick Heller, whose book, Secular Meditation, is out and everywhere, and we're talking about it today on the show. So, Rick, tell people how they can get your book, how they can contact you, and if you have any workshops or do you work with people remotely. I know you work in the Massachusetts area, but just share with people some things about your book and connection with you.
So the book is called Secular Meditation. It's available online at Amazon.com, at Barnes & Noble, and other independent bookstores. And my website is www.rickheller.com. That's RICKHELLER. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm writing blog posts. I'm interviewing various people regarding mindfulness and meditation. For instance, there's a group here. I'm in the Boston area. There's a group called Mindful Boston, and someone named Gina Bean runs that group, and I have an audio interview with her. I'm not running a radio station, but just sort of on a more irregular basis. But I am just going to be doing a series of conversations with various people about mindfulness in the next few months. So that's on the website. And in terms of leading meditations, right now I'm just local in Cambridge. Every Tuesday night in Harvard Square, I lead a meditation, and everyone is welcome to come. And to find out more, you can go to humanisthub.org, humanist and then HUB, because Boston is the hub of the universe, of course.
Humanisthub.org. And say your website again.
rickheller.com.
Awesome. So you can go out and get this book. I enjoyed it immensely and didn't have time to do all the practices, but I really appreciate how experiential it is. That's how I learn best. It's how I wrote my book, is that I talk about something and then have a practice for people. And that's what you did, Rick, that I think is so effective, especially for those of us who learn best that way.
Yeah, so because I lead the meditations, and we change them up. So we have mindfulness of breath is very common, the loving kindness, mindfulness of sound meditation we do quite a bit, and we've actually literally had a marching band come by the window as we were inside meditating. There literally was a marching band in Harvard Square coming by a couple times when we've been meditating. But one of the reasons I have so many different practices, I've noticed that different people respond best to different practices. So sometimes other places they say this is a way to go, and I find that different people respond best to different practices.
No, you have so many different practices in the book, and I really love that. And you just mentioned the marching band, and in the book you talk about different sounds that you could be listening to a train, the wheels of the train, and incorporate that in your meditation. I thought that was fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the messages of Buddhism, but I also believe it is correct in terms of neuroscience, and because I have a journalism background, I have interviewed scientists about this, is that there really is no stimulus that is inherently bad. It's the judgment that we bring to it. So, for instance, if a marching band goes by and you're trying to study for the final, it's noise because it's interfering with what you're trying to do. But if actually you're doing a meditation in which you're paying attention to the sound, the marching band is just good stuff, just something to listen to. So the sound itself has no inherent good or badness to it. It's just how it interferes with what we're trying to, whether it interferes or whether it is consonant with what we're trying to achieve at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And I think of the phrase "attitude is everything," because which I love, and I find that you can use the sound, which you talk about in your book, use the sound in the meditation, which just as you're speaking, I'm remembering staying somewhere like a bed and breakfast, and there was a foghorn. and the foghorn was going, and there was a bell on a buoy out in the bay. And I just started meditating and just used it in my meditation. And I think that people can do that.
Yes.
Anywhere that you are. So before the break, I promised I would talk about this, so I'm going to go back to it, which is what you say about universal love. It's a chapter in your book, and you even say that people might say that that's a bit ambitious, that we can practice universal love. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so in the meta practice, you expand the circle from yourself and your loved ones to neutral people, to difficult people, and ultimately the goal is actually really to love everyone. So I do ask that question, is it actually possible? And what I actually come to is that I think it's possible at least to not hate everyone. Because, there are some people in the world who are, mass murderers, serial killers, things like that. And you wouldn't want, if the word love means wanting to spend time with a person, hanging out with a person, interacting with that person, you really don't want to do that with a murderer. But you can, I think, neutralize the feeling of hatred, because I think even in those cases, if you actually think about these people who are causing harm, there are things that brought them to that place, and the goal is to be able to think rationally about them. Sometimes when we're full of hatred, we actually overreact. And I don't know if it's possible to overreact with a serial killer, but just more conventional person who is a problem. If you develop hatred toward a person, you may actually do something to them that is worse than what they did to you. That's these sort of vicious circles that we always hear about. And cycles of violence you often hear about, too, that one person does something, the other person escalates. So if you can actually neutralize your hatred and get to the point of equanimity, then you can still try to solve the problem. You can still try to avert the harm, but by thinking rationally about them. So I think that is the way to go. And I actually do have a source within the Buddhist tradition called the Visuddhimagga, which I think does take that point that in this particular practice, you are the person who is considered the harmful person. You're not trying to get to the point where you are cherishing them and spending time with them, but just getting to the point of neutrality.
I like that. It seems to me that in the book, though, you say that people often will say, why should I love someone who doesn't love me or who has harmed me, who doesn't treat me well? How do I do that? How do I love someone who, and the person might be harming me now, or has continued to do this, especially if it's a young person. How do people overcome that there's someone harming them, or who obviously doesn't love them or treat them well? How do they love that person?
Let's get the more conventional case of a person who, let's say, you would like to love them and have a relationship with them, but they don't love you back. They're not a bad person, but it's just kind of a one-way thing, and they're not reciprocating. So you might then have, negative or spiteful feelings toward them, but that is actually a feeling you're carrying. Those are negative feelings that you're carrying. Yep. And one of the things that we're trying to get to in this practice, I discuss what the meaning of enlightenment is, and I don't necessarily know that there is any one particular meaning, but I like this idea that you actually get to the point of a form of equanimity, and it's a positive equanimity where basically you are going throughout your day from moment to moment in a state that is basically looking at the world in a warm way. We have a limited amount of life on Earth. We are actually, most of us, I would say, are probably privileged compared to our if not our parents, certainly our grandparents and our great-grandparents. So we have a lot of things to be thankful for. So
that's right.
There are times that is, I think, anger does have a role. I distinguish between anger and hatred. Hatred is this sort of an anger without a source sometimes. Mm-hmm. It just is permanent and overwhelming. But there are sometimes it is appropriate to be angry. But most of our lives, I think, should be we should be leading them in a positive and grateful state. So that's what this practice is trying to do. And so, in the case of unreciprocated love, of a person who is a decent person, but they're just not loving you back, I think it's actually okay to still love them as long as you let go of the need for that reciprocation.
Yep. Yeah, which I know in Buddhism, it's so great that you mentioned insight centers where you live, because I go to the Insight Santa Cruz Center here in Central California, and I know I started going because I was attached to an outcome or attached to something I just couldn't have. And so I went and did some workshops there. They do a meditation practice every day at noon. And the person speaking was speaking about non-attachment. And it was fantastic. So I think that you're spot on, that we can continue to love but not have an expectation that it's going to be reciprocal.
Exactly. And one of my themes is I do believe that happiness is for the most part generated from within. And I use the example, if you read in the newspaper or online that your team won the game, you didn't actually watch the game, but you just read that and you feel happy. What's actually happening? That's actually a piece of information that's gone into your brain, and then your brain is actually generating that state of happiness. So you actually have the ability to self-generate that happiness, and loving kindness and compassion practices are a way to do that. And I do believe that most people, as long as they have their basic physical needs met for food, hydration, shelter, place to sleep, if you're physically in a okay state, you have the ability to use these mindfulness practices to get to a good and joyful state.
I completely agree with you. You know, what you've been talking about for the last couple of minutes reminds me of Marianne Williamson, who, talks in a lot of her books, Return to Love especially, and she's speaking from A Course in Miracles practice, but she says that, it's not the other person that's harming you when you hate them, when you've not forgiven them, when you're angry. It's all churning inside you, and you are harming yourself. And sometimes, obviously, people don't even know. People don't know that you're resentful. They don't know that you're angry or hating them. You are causing harm within yourself.
Yeah, and I think I wouldn't. It's pretty natural to do that, and I wouldn't sort of judge a person. I don't think you need to judge yourself negatively for doing that. It's a natural habit. It's something that I would say in our culture is pretty standard, and these ideas that you can actually take a moment to be mindful and make this shift. That's actually something that is not yet common sense, but maybe 50 years from now that will be common sense.
That's right. Marianne Williamson also says that the miracle is that we can change our mind.
That's right.
And so that's the miracle that we can change. So you just been mentioning the word mindful several times in our conversation recently. I want you to talk about mindfulness. Like, what is mindfulness and how can people practice it? And I do want, before the show ends, for you to tell people how to get started with this practice.
So I do have some mindfulness practices. So mindfulness is often defined as paying attention to the present moment with a feeling that is sometimes it's called non-judgmental, but it actually is this feeling of metta, this feeling of warmth and welcoming, to welcome every moment and as you pay attention to it. And the distinction between mindfulness and meditation that I make is that meditation is when you are sitting, let's say, quietly on a cushion or a chair for, let's say, 20 minutes and focusing on one thing. Whereas mindfulness is a broader thing. It includes meditation, but you can also do that while you're walking. So you could be mindful while you're hiking. So when I walk in the woods, as I mentioned, it used to be that I was kind of bored when I walked in the woods, but when I got to the top of the mountain, it was exciting because it was a great view. But now that I practice mindfulness and know how to really pay attention to every step and to see the plants and just focus on the way the plants are, and even the walk through the lower parts of the forest is pretty exciting. But in order to get to that state, it does help to start with a kind of a breath meditation first. If you do a mindful hike, I often say, before you go on the hike, take a few minutes on a bench, let's say at the beginning of the trail, and to pay attention to your breath, quiet your inner thoughts, and then you can really see the splendor of the natural environment.
I love that. That was one of my favorite parts of your book when you talk about whether it's hiking or being in a city, traveling while you're working, and even eating, and even couch potatoes can be mindful, right?
That's right. So I have this. We watched some of the people in my group, and I watched the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, I guess it was. And for a while, we actually just turned the sound off and just watched the movements of the players. And it was pretty neat because what I realized is that the chatter of the announcers, of the game announcers, is almost like the inner chatter in your mind. It kind of interferes with your ability to enjoy the visual splendor of the game.
Mm-hmm. No, I thought that was such a funny part, and I will never think of watching TV the same again after reading about couch potatoes in your book. So I also like the part, since I work with a lot of people who have eating disorders, particularly compulsive overeating. You mentioned that we can be mindful while eating, and that we do have an obesity problem in this country.
Yeah, so mindful eating is paying attention to all your sensations with food. So you would be noticing not just the taste and the aroma, but also the texture, and really focusing on the food. So we have done that. We went to a taqueria, and while we were waiting for the food to arrive at our table, we had a little meditation, quieted the mind, and when the food arrived, we ate the food silently and slowly to really pay attention to the food. And one of the gentleman who was eating, he noticed that he actually ate it slowly. He didn't actually finish his meal. He took the rest of it home, and he thought that normally I would have just scarfed it all down. But he noticed, because he ate it more mindfully, that he noticed his own internal hunger signals had quieted a little bit, and he didn't have to finish it.
That's awesome. No, I love that. I worked with somebody as an assistant years ago. Her name is Judy Wardell Halliday. She's in the Bay Area, and she founded a group called Thin Within, and she was a nurse. And this is almost exactly what you put in the book that she found back in the 80s, which is that when you slow down, and whether you do a breath exercise or however you do it, you slow down, you have your food in front of you, you only have food that appeals to you from deep down, you eat slowly and savor each bite, you put your fork down, you don't talk while you're eating, you just focus on your food gratefully, and you're able to leave food on your plate. And so she does this whole exercise with food where she has people eat a meal and do so. She calls it conscious eating, but mindful eating is the same. And this could solve a lot of problems for people who find, particularly this time of year, that they're overeating.
And something else one can do is to I have an exercise in mindfulness of thoughts. One can notice if you're driving home and you think of you're tempted to stop off at some place before dinner to get a quick snack, and you have that thought, you can actually step back and notice the thought simply as a thought. It's not actually your will. It's not a compulsion. It's just these words that passed across your brain, and in doing that, you can have a little bit of distance from it. You can notice the thoughts. You can notice what feels like desire, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to associate your intention with it. You can just notice these are feelings, and then you can let them go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then just one more thing that I wanted to mention before I hit just some closing points is that I was noticing what you talk about speaking more mindfully. It reminds me of the nonviolent communication movement, NVC. Do you think that there are similarities?
Well, I do talk about, so there is this connection between what's called nonviolent communication, and Buddhists have this practice of compassionate speaking. NVC, I'm a little bit familiar with it. I've taken a couple of those trainings. It doesn't normally, I don't know if they don't credit Buddhism. I don't know if there's actually, it might be parallel. Maybe it doesn't come from there, but it's quite similar. And it is an acknowledgement that when one speaks, if one speaks, let's say, too forcefully, it causes a reaction in the other person, and you can get into emotions are raised. So one of the ideas, for instance, in NVC is to try to talk of things in a way that is sort of more factually, that will get another person to be to say yes. I would say to say yes rather than no. So, for instance, I say, rather than say what you did was outrageous, and the other person hearing that is going to say, no, it wasn't outrageous because I did it. I wouldn't have done it. Yeah. But if you were to say, I feel outraged about what you did, the other person, has to agree because they're seeing you in your outrage. So it's just a little. Sometimes it can be just a little way of changing the way you speak that I think can make the even difficult conversations go a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree. And changing the you to I think that anytime we give you messages to people, they can become defensive and it can cause an argument. But if we just own our feelings, right, and use I, it's people can listen more compassionately as well.
Yeah, the reason I think sometimes people don't do that is one learns sometimes that if you don't use the word I, sometimes it sounds more objective. Like newspapers don't, reporters don't use that word I. It sounds more objective, but still there's an I behind it. And I think it's actually in many cases it's better to acknowledge that it's a subjective viewpoint.
Absolutely, and if peace is it's in your subtitle, so having more peace within us and peace between us, it would help to speak in that way with one another.
That's right.
So how do listeners get started, Rick? Let's talk about, do they do it alone? Do they do it in a group? And how do they begin?
I, just to get started, a book can be helpful to just the very beginning, get some ideas. But I do think it is helpful to find a group if possible, because sometimes you do something and it's not quite working, and people give you feedback. So when we have our meditations, we after our, let's say, 20-minute meditation, we go around the circle, and people say how the meditation went and what they had some difficulty with, and it's something I think people find that helpful to see that other people can be struggling with that, and they learn when another person sort of figures out something about how to be able to focus a little bit better. That's helpful. Plus, also the fact that other people are struggling with it makes a person feel that, even if it's a struggle at first for me, then I don't need to quit. I can keep going with it. So, certainly, I do think a book can be helpful, and my book, Secular Meditation, I, of course, do recommend to people. On my website, I also, if you go to rickheller.com, I have a video page in which I lead some meditation videos. So if a person would like to start by listening first rather than reading, that's another possibility. Actually, there are some online meditations. I actually participated in online meditation sponsored by the Secular Buddhist Association, which is you can find that online, and we actually have something where about 15 people call in. We don't call in. It's kind of like it's like Skype, but it's a different program. But it's like Skype. We all connect online. We can see each other as we meditate, but we're online.
Cool. Yeah, I like how at the end of your book, and by the way, this is Rick Heller, if you're just checking in, and his book is Secular Meditation. At the end of Rick's book, he has tips on creating your own mindfulness group, which I really like, that you're giving people guidelines in terms of how to start their own group, which I think would benefit. That's how I started meditating, was in a group. And I found the energy, this was transcendental meditation using a mantra, but I did feel that the energy was amazing in a group.
And I actually find myself, I meditate every day, and I often meditate, more often I'm meditating by myself, but sometimes when I'm meditating with the group, I actually kind of do it more thoroughly because I provide the instructions and I remember, I'm supposed to do this.
I like it in a group. It's just different, but I think that having both a meditation practice where you do it by yourself in solitude, and then you have a group is great. So we are at the end of our show, Rick. Thank you so much for being here, and best of luck to you with this great book.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Susan.
You're welcome. And thank you. I always thank you, my great listeners, for being willing to expand your consciousness. And perhaps you've been inspired to meditate more, at least meditate some, or to start a meditation practice. Please join me next week when Tobin Blake shares his new book, The Healing of Jordan Young, a 21st century guide to health and healing. So until then, remember that you carry the light.
You've been listening to the transformative show, We Carry the Light, with host Dr. Susan Allison, the show that inspires you to find the light within and shine your light in the world. Who are you right now, and who do you want to be? What is it that makes you happy, helps you feel fulfilled, and living your purpose? Tune in every Thursday, 10 a.m. Pacific, and let Dr. Susan help you discover that you carry the unique light that only you can shine.
The preceding audio was via a Skype call.